So this is the last topic that we want to deal with, and I would like to help you understand a little bit more precisely the body cavities and parietal and visceral relative to the membranes that cover the organs. So here are our body cavities. We have a dorsal body cavity that is composed of the cranial cavity and the vertebral canal or vertebral cavity. The point at which I stop being within the cranial cavity and am within the vertebral canal is this opening right here, and that is the foramen magnum of the skull. So when you're looking at the dorsal body cavity, we can break it into a cranial cavity and a vertebral canal or vertebral cavity, and the dividing point is the foramen magnum. And then obviously in the cranial cavity we have housed the brain, and within the spinal canal we have housed the spinal cord. So it's called the dorsal body cavity because it is on the back side of the body. Then we also have a ventral body cavity. It is referred to as ventral body cavity because it's contained in the front of the body, this on the anterior. And this is the major coelom or space that houses the organs. Now we can divide it into three regions like we did previously. We have the thoracic region here, we have the abdominal cavity here, and then we have the pelvic cavity below that. And remember, I told you that the thoracic cavity is separated from the abdominal pelvic cavity by a muscular sheet, and there you see the diaphragm being the physical barrier between the thoracic cavity and the abdominal cavity. Now, I told you that some people refer to this as the abdominal pelvic cavity, and that is because there is no physical barrier between the abdominal cavity and the pelvic cavity. So if you look, you have this one space, but when you think about what organs and organ systems are contained within them, there is a difference between the two. So what we do is we take and we draw an imaginary line here from the sacral promontory down across to the pubic symphysis, and that imaginary border then divides the abdominal cavity, which primarily has the digestive organs within it, down to or away from the pelvic cavity here, which primarily has either the organs of reproduction and or the organs that are associated with your urinary system. So bladder is located here, uterus is here, rectum is back behind if you're female. If you're male, the bladder is in front, anteriorly, and posteriorly you're going to have the rectum in back. So please keep these things in mind. Cranial cavity divided by the foramen magnum into the vertebral canal. The thoracic cavity divided by the physical barrier of the diaphragm, and then the abdomen segregated off by the muscular sheet of the diaphragm and the line going from the sacral promontory to the pubic symphysis, and clearly denoting the difference between the abdominal and pelvic cavity. Now, if we take a different view, we notice that the thorax can be subdivided into several different regions. We are going to have a superior mediastinum, which is going to be this gold color. There's going to be a middle mediastinum here, which is essentially where the heart is located. The middle mediastinum would also be referred to as the pericardial cavity. And then you're going to have an inferior mediastinum that is behind the heart. Now, I'm not going to be so concerned about these divisions. What I really need you to understand is sort of a general demarcation between where the lungs are and where the heart is located. So we have a pleural cavity on the left, we have a pericardial cavity in the center, and we have a right pleural cavity. which means that we're going to have the right lung over here, the left lung over here, and then between, intermediate to the lungs, we are going to have the heart. And each of those will be contained in their own separate sac so that they're not interfering with the function of either side or what's in the middle. Now the gold, the superior mediastinum, this is essentially where you have the main stem bronchus coming down before it divides. You could refer, and the trachea, and then you're going to have the esophagus passing through there, and then the vascular tree that is coming off from the base of the heart. Now, let's take just a closer look to try to get our minds wrapped around parietal and visceral. Parietal means that the membrane is attached to the body wall. So you notice here within the abdominal cavity, you have the body wall, but then the blue area here is what they're using to define the space of the abdominal cavity. And notice that the body wall has a dark blue line on it, and that would be covered by a parietal membrane. Now, the membrane in the abdominal cavity is the peritoneum. So the peritoneum, where it is located on the body wall, would be the parietal peritoneum. However, notice that the membrane comes off from the body wall. It goes and it attaches around each of the organs and suspends them within the space. So where you see the dark blue line covering an organ, either the large intestine or the small intestine, then that would be visceral peritoneum. The visceral peritoneum would be anywhere that it is covering the surface of the organ, whether it's on the surface of the liver, on the surface of the stomach, or the surface of the large intestine, or the surface of the small intestine. That peritoneal membrane is continuous. It goes around the organs, and then it may actually attach the organs to the body wall, but where it's attaching it to the body wall is where it is parietal. Where it is covering the surface of an organ, then it is visceral. If something is eviscerated, the organs are removed. And so visceral always refers to the membrane as it is covering an organ. Now, what is unique about the abdomen is that the peritoneum, where it extends off from the body wall to surround the organ, it forms a double membraned sheet that attaches the organ to the posterior abdominal wall. These sheets, there are 5 of them, get their own names. So you're going to have the lesser omentum on this side of the stomach, the greater omentum here on the inferior border of the stomach, or the greater curvature of the stomach. And this greater omentum is going to come down and loop around and form the greater omentum that covers the organs as they're packed inside the abdomen. And then you're going to have the transverse mesocolon here that is attaching to the large intestine. And then each branch of the mesentery, as it comes out, it surrounds a structure, or I should say a segment of the small intestine. So this is the mesentery of the small bowel that attaches the ileum and cecum to the body wall. So let's see, 5 mesenteric folds: greater omentum, lesser omentum, mesocolon, and the mesentery of the small bowel. I'm missing one. So that last one is going to be the falciform ligament. And the falciform ligament is going to be this area here that is attaching the anterior surface of the liver to the body wall. So right about in this area here, my liver is going to send the falciform ligament over and attach, and it actually extends down to the belly button as the ligamentum tears hepatis, and that is what attached your umbilical vein to your body. But we'll pay more attention about these when we actually get to chapter 25 and talk about the digestive system and the mesenteric folds that are helping to hold the different digestive organs in place. Now, similarly, you have the heart. It has a serous membrane that covers that organ, so that is going to be your visceral pericardium. And then you're going to form a parietal pericardium that forms the outer sac that holds the heart to the body. And so the heart is effectively suspended and floating in pericardial fluid. On the surface of the heart, you're going to have the visceral pericardium. Then you're going to have a thin layer of pericardial fluid, and then you are going to have the continuation of the pericardium as it forms the sac that separates the heart from the lungs. And that is going to be your parietal pericardium as it attaches to the diaphragm and the surface of the wall of the chest. Same thing happens with your lungs. The right lung and the left lung will be encased in sacs. The surface of the sac that is on the lung will be the visceral pleura, and then you'll have a thin layer of pleural fluid, and then you'll have the parietal pleura that it is attaching and lining the body wall, containing the cavity that holds the lung. So you'll have parietal pleura on the outside attaching to the ribs and the chest, and then attaching to the surface of each of the lungs, you'll have the visceral pleura, where you'll have the serous membrane covering the organ, and the organ in this case is the lung. So that is everything that we need to talk about relative to the first chapter, the introductory chapter. And hopefully this helps you understand what's going on. Further information can be gained by listening to the PowerPoint presentation that is in Canvas, posted in Canvas, and or reading the materials that I have associated with this first chapter, and of course going back to your textbook and looking up things that you don't understand. Obviously, when you're in class or lab and we are together, then you can ask questions of me.